All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. And for all of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. This is our monthly annual or monthly free CNE. If you want your CNE or CEU today, please put your license information on the form before you leave. Please complete an evaluation form, and your feedback is important to help us with future planning. For those on Zoom, we will be sending out a short competency quiz. You must receive a score of 80% or better to verify participation, as well as an evaluation. As well as an evaluation. Make sure you have added the interimeducation@gmail.com to your contacts, and you must be online at least 50 minutes to get full credit for the hour. We will be recording the session and posting it on our Interim Healthcare Topeka YouTube page. You may review these again later if you wish. And due to the rapidly changing nature of the healthcare and practice interventions, please consider all recordings out of date 1 year from the original recording. All right. Well, now that we're done with all the housekeeping, I want to plug our next month's presenter. We'll have Hazel Hayworth, PhD from Queen's University in Belfast. She'll be presenting on Parkinson's research on supporting Parkinson's medications management in practice. But without further ado, today our speaker is Candace Young. Candace has 30 years of experience working in hospice and other medical settings. She is a graduate of the University of Washington in Seattle and recently completed the postgraduate play therapy program at Mid-America Nazarene University. She is currently completing supervision hours towards her clinical licensure and certification as registered play therapist. Candace is in private practice in Topeka, where she works with children and adults navigating difficult life transitions. She brings extensive experience and training in art, nature-based, and play therapy, offering creative and meaningful pathways to healing. And she's a fan favorite of ours. So without further ado, Candace.
All right, thank you. So should we check and make sure everyone in Cyberland can hear me okay? They say they can. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Is it on? You're good. Thank you. Okay. All right. We're waiting for the sign. While I'm waiting for the sign to start, thanks all for coming. So, looks like we got a few more coming in. All right. So I might start just kind of talking about puddle jumping. Okay, I'm good to go. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about puddle jumping, which is understanding how children grieve and looking at the perspective of neurobiology to understand why they grieve differently. I think the really cool thing, because as you know, I maybe have been working in this or related fields for at least 30 years now. It's a very different world that we're in now compared to when I started, where the brain was back in the 1900s. The brain was sort of a black box, and we didn't quite know as much about how things work. And with some of the technology and that's come along and research that's been done, we know so much more about how the brain works and how our nervous system works, and it's super cool because it's also kind of following what we thought and what a lot of therapists thought. This is sort of how it seems to be working, and now there's like research that's supporting it, especially for work with children and play therapy. There's kind of been this sense of this works, we know this works, we know this is great. And now there's research supporting, yeah, and this is how, and yes, it is great. Okay. So my goal for you today is to understand grief through a neurodevelopmental lens, identify how grief presents at different developmental stages, and differentiate between grief and trauma and dysregulation. And to apply neurobiology-informed assessment and treatment, especially play therapy. Now, I know as an audience, you're not all play therapists or even therapists, but a lot of the things I'm going to include is just some things that are helpful with people, kids at different ages, and strategies. So it could go across different situations. Obviously in hospice, working with children who are bereaved, but even in our own lives, or if you're in school, just kind of understanding what sorts of interventions might be good based on where the kid's at developmentally. So puddle jumping is a metaphor, and it describes how kids grieve. They grieve in short bursts, and then they grieve, like jump in the puddle, splash, jump out. It's not how we grieve as adults. As adults, we kind of get in this canoe and get in the river, and we stay in this river of grief for a long, long time and just go keep in it. And so it is very different for kids. You'll see kids jump into like the hard emotions that go with loss. And then they'll go right back to playing or being curious. And I'll see this even in therapy sessions with kids talking about any hard thing. They'll be like, blah, 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 tragic thing, just witnessed this last month, and this is really weird. And then it's like, oh, let's play darts. I mean, they'll just jump track. And that you might think is denial, or like a lot of parents are like, I don't know, maybe they're fine, or they don't seem to be, processing it right, or actually that's exactly how kids you would expect them to process it. So the reason for this is that kiddos have a limited ability to tolerate intense feelings for very long periods. And there's actually reasons in their brain, their nervous system for this. So this is looking at how the nervous system works, and we're going to touch a little bit on trauma-informed stuff. There's a lot of overlap with that, with all the stuff we've learned about brains and that's informed trauma, and also some attachment-based stuff, so which are all kind of connecting in a neat way now that we understand the brain. Okay, so the developing nervous system, it relies kind of on what they call oscillation activation, between being activated and regulated. So between being kind of feeling a strong emotion and I'm feeling okay, I'm that. And so kids especially have a need to feel safe and connected. And so when they talk about or experience or think about the loss, they also really need to reconnect and feel safe again quickly. And so the other thing that can be helpful is using play and distraction with kids, but also really important for kids is knowing who is the key steady adult around that can be kind of their co-regulator, if that makes sense. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but kids don't necessarily, especially the younger ones, have the ability to totally regulate their own emotions. And especially the younger we are, it's more and more important for a caregiver to kind of help be their co-regulator and help them meet them where they're feeling, and then kind of try to help them down. So the key points, again, kids may feel fine one moment and not fine the other, and right back again. The other thing that's important to know with kids, and this is important, I think, for kids at all ages, that the grief may reemerge repeatedly as their brains develop. And it's kind of like, because our brains develop these new ways of working and thinking and problem solving and understanding. It's kind of like the kid has to go back through, and now I have these amazing new tools. I'm going to process my grief using these new tools. So you'll see things as they develop where the grief will reemerge. Puddle jumping supports the survival, and it also supports their way of integrating the experience, and it's not denial. And then one of the really most important things for us to remember is that an adult who's in tune with a kiddo is really important to their healing. And so rather than forcing them to like, oh, you're sad, let's stay in the sad zone and process this, you got to go with them and tune into where they're going and go with them. It can be a real challenge in terms of what if the adult that they lose is a primary caregiver, parent, or something. So then you're looking for who are the other consistent people around that can be that person for the kid. The other challenge is even if you have two parents and lose one, the other parent is often not necessarily in the best space to be that co-regulator for the kid. So a lot of times the success for kids coping, even with very difficult loss of a parent, is a complicated situation for grief by definition for a kid. But the best outcome is seen when the kids have another stable adult person in their life. They don't even have to be super close. They don't necessarily even have to be, as the kid gets older, don't have to be living in the home or anything. They just have to be a steady presence. So you guys can all be that person too, for some people. So we talk about neurobiology, but I want to talk about, we're talking about the neurobiology system, but we're not talking about pathology. Grief is a natural process. It's not an illness, a disorder. It is a healthy response to a loss. It is actually attachment-based and neurobiological response to loss. And the behavior you'll see in kids reflects where they're at in their nervous system in terms of development and what state their nervous system is in. So children experience loss before they have fully developed cognition. And I think that's important to think about too as we're talking through this. A lot of times I'll hear people say, oh, well, the 3-year-old won't remember. And there's good evidence based on how the brain works and develops that it is impacting them significantly, and they may not remember verbally or picture-wise, but their body will remember. So the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that emotional regulation has to happen before reasoning or language. So if I'm really upset and you try to come tell me why I should calm down because I need to be getting my act together because I'm live on TV right now or whatever, if I'm dysregulated, I can't hear that, I can't process that. So you have to meet me where I'm at first, which is my regulation, dysregulation. Say, Candace, you seem really nervous. Let's meet you where you are, and deep breath. And now I can start listening. Oh yeah, I got to get it together. Here I am. I can do this. And then insight follows safety. Same kind of thing. Once you decide you're safe, your nervous system decides you're safe, you can start thinking, what can I learn from this? Just a quick thing, again, kind of reiterating definition of implicit versus explicit memory, which is important. So when we are first born, we don't have explicit memory. That develops over time. But we do have implicit memory. So explicit is kind of like the movies you see in your head when you remember something, or the words or the smells or the whatever you think of when you review something that happened in the past. That's explicit memory. And we don't really start having those form till, I don't know, 3 kids. Some kids are different, some younger, some older, but 3 to 5 is when you start really laying down memory tracks and remembering them. So implicit memory is automatic skills, movement, tasks, physical experiences. And I like to say that if the kid experienced it, they remember it because the body remembers it. So you've probably heard the body keeps the score kind of idea, with the idea that even if we don't remember a trauma, we still often have evidence of that trauma in our physical response. So this is my favorite drawing of the brain, or one of them. And it shows the key brain systems. And I'll just kind of start from the bottom. The orange is the lowest level. That is the lower brainstem. That is our primitive brain. That is our fight or flight, our primitive animal where we respond to, am I safe, am I not? Off on. It's sensory input and survival. So that part of the brain, the child, when they're developing that, they're working on, am I safe? That's the big question. Am I safe? If that gets answered, yes, I'm safe, and as the child grows and the rest of the brain develops more, this midsection comes in. This is the midbrain. This is kind of our mammal brain. Basically, that is where we have emotional development and connection and attachment, interactive interconnectedness, and things that help us as humans survive besides running is working together and helping each other, right? That's probably how we survived as a species. So that's kind of this part of this brain. And that part of the brain is really simply answering the question, am I loved? So once you have established I'm safe, I'm loved, then the cortical brain, the cerebral cortex comes in. That is the unique, at least the development level of it is unique in humans. And that is where we do thinking, learning, inhibition, reasoning. And that part of the brain is where we're saying, now what can I learn from this? So all of these structures are here in the brain when we're born, but they are not fully developed. So they develop bottom up from the lower brainstem up to the cerebral cortex. So this is what I've talked about is the neurosequential model of development, that you can look that up. It was developed by Bruce Perry, and he's a neurobiologist who also became a clinical psychologist. I think he is really great to listen to talk if you are interested in neurobiology and kids and development and humans. And you can find him all over YouTube and stuff. But basically his thing is that you got to have bottom-up approaches versus top-down. So you have to meet at the lower safety level of the brain first before you can help them understand they're loved and then help, what am I learning from this loss, you know? So the approach also follows where they're at age-wise, you know, developmentally. So this is the same picture, but I added in the ages that it develops. So the lower brainstem is developing in the first year. So that's where, you know, if a child is has a major loss of a caregiver at that age, yes, it impacts them, because guess what? I'm getting input that things are not safe. What I'm looking for as a very young human is that things become safe and reliable and people respond to me. And so even if that response changes, suddenly my parent is not responding, it's some other person, that's a red flag to me as a baby. I'm not able to articulate it, but my nervous system knows there's something different going on. Things need to be predictable. I'm not safe. So going up the brainstem to the midbrain, the green part on this, from 1 to 3, the lower part of the midbrain is called the diencephalon. That is developing, that is where we have kind of in our interconnectedness as humans, the attachment, also our emotional development. So that's kind of 1 to 3 years old. The limbic system, which is also the midbrain, this is the part that develops ages 3 to 8. And this is the part where, now I'm looking at that one, attachment and emotional development, but really it's still really looking at emotional development and attachment, but I think it's heavier on the emotional at that age, whereas at the lower midbrain, it's more attachment. Then you go up to the blue section, which is neocortex, and that starts really kicking in at age 8 or over, and keeps developing all the way till we're maybe 28, till it's fully developed. And that's where we do our thinking and learning, reasoning, words, and inhibiting impulses. So we'll focus in a little more on those. Hopefully it'll make sense. So infant, toddler, 0 to 1, this is the part of their brain, the lower brain stem, that is really there and developing, and that is the part of the brain that's saying, am I safe? And so caregivers at that age are kind of the external regulators, right? The kid doesn't say, oh, I'm upset, I'm hungry, I need to feed myself. Or they're not even saying I'm upset, I'm hungry. They're just, I'm upset, something's not okay. And the caregiver is really that regulator, trying to figure out, what is it? Do you need to eat? Do you need to sleep? Do you need to be held? Do you need to, that caregiver outside is really key for that baby to be safe and survive. So any loss disrupts that sense of safety and predictability. And so kids at that age have no concept of death or of permanence. That, I don't know if you remember seeing things about object permanence, where if you cover up an object in front of a baby this young, they'll forget it. They'll like lose it. And at a certain point, when you cover it up, they start looking for it, which is when they start to enjoy the game peekaboo. I know it's still there. Where is it? So, but at this age, no concept of permanence. And loss is experienced as dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation is what I would emphasize. So the other thing that's important is, and this is kind of going down a little alley, but I wanted to include it, the window of tolerance. That's connected to this part of the brainstem, and grief narrows that window of tolerance. So I wanted to say a little bit about that. It's actually a really useful thing to think of around regulating, working with kids. The window of tolerance is like with our lower brainstem, we got the vagus nerve, and we have our baseline where everything's good, I'm safe, I'm satisfied, everything looks good. That's they call the rest and digest state, where you're calm, you can eat, you can think, all that. You're doing great. What happens when we see a threat is a lot of times we either go way up to dysregulation and eventually fight or flight. So we see a saber-toothed tiger walking towards us, we panic and run, or if we stopped, that part of our brain that's thinking is not working. If it was working, we probably wouldn't be here today, because if we stopped and said, I wonder if that's actually a saber-toothed tiger, and maybe it's just like a 3D image, by then you're gone. So there's a reason why we do fight or flight, because it helped us survive. The other end is kind of hypoarousal, which you'll also see. And that's more when it's like clear that you're in danger and fight or flight is not going to work. Then we tend to, it's kind of hide or freeze or play dead, and that's where you see dysregulation looking more like lethargy or zoned out, depressed, freezing. So things in the window, things that expand your window so you're feeling good, rest, digest, relaxed. Things that expand that are using grounding techniques, things that help you with mindfulness and being aware of your present surroundings. Breathing exercises, so things where you do the deep breath, hold it in, let it out. All of those things tell our nervous system, you're safe. Enjoyable activities that we do that kind of get our brain to kick in all those nice neurotransmitters like dopamine, that also tells your brain, I'm safe. Positive self-talk, using kind words to yourself, that makes your brain feel safer than if you're saying mean things to yourself. Your nervous system is more relaxed. Social support, if you have people around you, again, and then self-care strategies, those are things like make sure you get your 8 hours of sleep, that you have consistent sleep schedule, that you eat, drink, hydrate, all that stuff throughout the day as humans benefit, that you move a little, that all those things. Things that shrink the window of tolerance are trauma, which we know, and stress, poor sleep, illness, and grief. So grief is right in there with something that, because the experience is loss. I don't know what just happened there. Did I do that? If the experience of loss is perceived especially at the lower age, as a threat. So, okay. So what you'll see when you see a toddler struggling with, or infant or toddler struggling with grief, what you'll see is the sleep and feeding disruption. You'll see regression in skills. So if they were sleeping through the night, they might not be. If they were, that's kind of young. Not all kids sleep alone at that age, but if they were, you might see them not want to sleep alone again. So regression is a big part. Separation anxiety is a big thing you'll see at that age. And really the focus for intervention is to help co-regulate, to help them to feel safe and to do that. So your interventions are using different models that you would imply or implement would be child-centered play therapy, which is a whole other conversation we can have someday about what that is if you're really interested. But it is a model that's very child-centered, follows the child and meets them where they are, and kind of goes with them around. Filial therapy is training basically, I see it as training the parents to be a child therapist with their child. Not that they're going to become their child's therapist, but learning a lot of those skills. And as the filial therapy, the parent is learning some of the interventions we'll talk about, and they'll actually schedule a couple times a week for a certain amount of time with their kid to just be doing that sort of interacting. And the rest of the time as a parent, you're doing things like working, being grumpy, being tired, trying to discipline, trying to keep your kids safe, trying to, you don't have the luxury that a therapist has of, oh, I have you in this room, just you in for this whole hour, and I will just focus on you. But in filial therapy, you're teaching the parent some of those skills, which can help with co-regulation for the kiddos. So the floor time is another aspect of that, which makes sense at that age, because where are the kids at that age? In our arms or on the floor? And TheraPlay is a very specific brand of play therapy that you can look up. And the neurosequential model is also what we have talked about. That's another approach. And that's basically what we're talking about here. So if you're working on the lower brainstem with the kiddo from birth to 1, what you want to do to help them, interventions would be to limit the stimuli, make sure their environment is predictable, that the adults are kind of there, and a safe base for them to explore from. It's nonverbal. You're not going to say anything to reassure them. It's physical, it's presence, it's their experience. Doing things that help that part of the brain, it's kind of the same thing with as you do it, it develops in your brain. And so some of the things that help at this stage in the lower brainstem are things that help it develop, are things with senses, tasting, playing with shaving cream, sand, playing with sand, smelling, even identifying things, like those books with, furry places and colors and whatever. All of those things are sensory, that can help a kid who's dysregulated because of the loss. Rhythmic movement and rocking and swinging is another really important part for the lower brainstem. So, even just holding and rocking, doing drums, doing things like that. And that remains true. I mean, that's kind of parallels with trauma. If you had a trauma at a young age, a lot of times a therapist will work with you at that level with these kinds of interventions, because that part of your brain you might not have had if you were neglected at that age, for example. You might not have gotten those experiences as consistently. And so the therapist may go with you back to, let's do some of those things. And even all of us today can do, if you do something that's rhythmic and repetitive and all that, it kind of tells your nervous system, I'm safe, because I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't safe, right? So it's kind of a way to hack into the nervous system and say you are safe. That makes sense. So the other really cool thing that can be helpful, and they also do this with attachment, where kids have had a hard time connecting, or like in the case of adoption, is doing grooming. Kind of braiding hair, brushing hair, and singing, or things like that. So those can also be helpful for kids in grief. Music, chanting, kind of that same thing. Listening to nature, and then deep pressure touch, weighted blankets, things like that, or things that are kind of more active can be helpful. Then we go up to preschool, and this is where the midbrain is developing, and so we're looking at ages 1 to 3, and we're working on attachment. So we're working on the question, our brain is saying, am I loved? And as long as we get the message back, yes, I'm loved, we also are getting the message, I'm safe, but that's a given. Now, am I loved? As long as I'm getting that, I'm doing okay, and my brain's going to develop healthy. So if I lose my loved one at that stage, it's a big impact. So that is also, at this point, this part of the brain is really developed. The cerebral cortex is not yet, the reasoning part, and that's why you see so much magical thinking in kids. So with kids in preschool, you'll see them repeating the question, why did grandpa die? Why did mom die? Over and over and over. And so just making sure that's normal at this age. They're making sure that it's still true. Okay, now is it true? Is it, it's kind of that, just getting a sense of, is this something that's going to stay the same? They also are very self-centered. They not narcissists, but like, they're just like, I am the world and the world is revolving around me. And so they also tend to blame themselves. So if there's a loss, even if it's nonverbal, there's still a sense of, I'm doing something wrong, that my caregiver is not responding. They will do play reenactment, and that is actually one of the key things why play therapy is so cool, is that they'll work through their issues by playing. Play is their work, play is their language. They don't have the words to process everything, but they can process it through play. And you'll also see things in where they'll do narrative correction. So it might be that if, especially with a traumatic loss, that you might see some scary play, car accident over and over again, or things, shooting other things or whatever. But over time, you may see that play resolving into, and then a hero comes in and they're safe again. So it's kind of that sort of thing with kids that you'll see. So the interventions, or the therapy models rather, again, would be the same, the child-centered, filial, floor time, and theraplay, same ones, same part of the brain. Some of the interventions for preschoolers, obviously sleep hygiene and eating and feeding, all that, you have to still have your safety and predictability. Doing things with gross motor coordination and balance is actually really helpful for them. So getting out on the playground, on the teeter-totter or whatever, that's actually going to help their grief. Creating positive attunement, again, kind of that's that, spending that time following the kid's lead for a while and really centering on them, and meeting them where their feelings are. A lot of times I'll see parents, I mean, we all do, we don't want to see a kid cry, so we'll correct the sadness. Yeah, like, so the kid will say, I'm really sad, but you also have a lot of great memories about your dad, right? And that's not meeting them, that's negating. So, I mean, you really miss your dad, you're really feeling sad. And then if they then hop over to, something else, you follow them there. You don't stay back in sad if they've moved on. So that's what positive attunement is. These are all the same things kids do in play anyway to develop their brain, but these are the specific things that can really help with grief. Rhythm and drumming we talked about, music and dance. You can do with older kids, recalling experiences. Remember the birthday party, remember the time we went to wherever, remember the, and they love I love you rituals, which gets at kind of that connection attachment thing. So anything, a lot of times I'll see with kids with separation anxiety, that don't want to then go to preschool all of a sudden because, they're not safe because they lost a primary caregiver. So I've worked with like a parent, the surviving parent, to work with them that they maybe have share a set of earrings, and one has one in there and the other has in theirs, and they're, anytime you miss me during the day, we're connected. See, here's this. There's a really great book called now I'm going to blank on it. The String, The Invisible String. Thank you, Val. And that's all about connection, and it tells a beautiful story for kids around how we're interconnected, and even with loss and separation. I'll give you more information on that at the end too. All right, so we go up to school age, and we are still in the midbrain. The limbic part is the emotional part is really going crazy. This is ages 3 to 8. They talk about terrible 2s, and I don't know why, because it's terrible 3s and up. So rapid limbic growth at this time. The top part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is still limited in how well it's wired into this system yet. So again, still magical thinking is kind of normal, and emotions. So they're working on Am I Loved? And they're basically able to reason concretely, not really, not the way a teenager can, where they can think theoretically, but they can think concretely. If I knock this cup of water over, it will spill and make the carpet wet. They can have that thought and not have to see it happen. So they also have a lot of somatic processing going on with that part of the brain developing. So what you'll see in kids is you'll see stomach aches and headaches and all kinds of aches and pains, and that's their grief at that age. That's very common. I don't feel good. You'll see anxiety and irritability because they're getting overwhelmed by emotions that they don't know how to regulate yet. And you will see academic changes because if you're struggling with your body and your emotions that much, you tend to not do as well in school at that time. So it's very normal for kids to have their grades dip a bit around loss. Same with a divorce or anything, so that's expected. Some of the therapy models that are helpful for this age, you can do storytelling because they do work with concrete, and they're starting to be able to hold images in their head and think about things abstract a little bit. You might do more directive therapy with them. That would again be, let's work on something that helps facilitate attachment between you and your mom when you're gone at school. Let's make a friendship bracelet and that kind of thing. So interventions that are helpful at that age would be, number one, to reflect their feelings. So if they're sad, you're sad. I notice you're really feeling, you seem sad. I see some tears coming there. You must be really sad. Instead of, oh, come on, let's cheer up. You still may hug them because that can be regulating, but it's not to fix them. I know we like to fix kids, but reflecting where they're at is more helpful. Using calming strategies. So it's that same thing. If a kid's really upset, you kind of meet them and then try to step in a little bit more calm. Okay. Why don't we sit down? Whatever you want to do. A lot of times with kids who can't get in control, offering them a cold glass of water and just a sip, and that'll help. It's a calming strategy. So you're teaching them about emotions. The nice thing is in school, kids are all learning all these emotions now and the skills, and they're learning all this stuff about neurobiology too, they're just not calling it that. But so anything, dollhouses, puppet shows, things that allow for imagination and pretend. And then the other thing that can be really helpful with school-age kids and it's called co-constructed narratives. But what I see that as is that can be really just a simple intervention that's helpful is to do some sort of memory thing with the parent and the child, or with the child and their surviving caregiver or their family. So doing putting together like a picture with all the images, a collage of all the things you remember about your lost parent, and you work on it together. So telling those stories together is helpful. So now we get into adolescence. And we'd like to think we're up here learning from the neocortex, but really the big player is still very much the midbrain at that age. And the limbic part of the development is, the limbic system is crazy active at this stage. So ages 8 to, we'll say 8 through teenage years, that part is going nuts. And the neocortex is not quite as, it's where it'll be by the time they're 28. But it is starting. They are starting to, if there's a sense of safety and then a sense that I am loved, they are starting to then learn from things. What can I learn from this? Versus not being able to get there and not learn from things. So I think that's basically what I just said. They're increased reward seeking because the limbic part of the brain is the impulse, I need, I want. And they don't have the frontal lobe yet to the cerebral cortex to say, well, if you do that, you might get addicted, or if you do that, you might crash the car. Or if, I mean, they don't have that reasoning part. They just have the, I want speed. I want to feel good. I want to, I want to be loved. So, how you'll see grief expressed in adolescence is more risk-taking, anger. You also see, if you think of that window of tolerance, the other end of it is emotional numbing. Existential distress, because they are getting to that point of, am I loved, and what can I learn from this? What does it all mean? And they are really starting to do that. So they do have existential distress. And physical pain, again, because their midbrain's super active, you'll see a lot of physical pain, not actual pain in adolescents who are grieving. Grief brain, which I think a lot of us who've lost someone might relate to the idea of grief brain, but it is a really big thing for adolescents with the fact that they just can't think clearly, kind of in a fog. And that's because this limbic system is going crazy with the strong emotional stuff, and the frontal lobe is not tracking yet. There's a seeking of connection that, again, we're in the middle brainstem, the am I loved? And that's a big thing we already know about teens, is they want to connect with their peers, right? And they also have oscillating grief, kind of like, it's not quite the same as the little puddle jumpers, but in the course of one day, you'll see them go from absolutely devastated to later in the day playing with their friends on video games and just okay. So cyclical grief. So this is a little bit about why the different parts of the brain are causing that, and you can look at that, but there are parts in that part of the brain that are making these things actually happen. So there's a part in the brain that is actually making grief feel physically painful, and there's research on that. So it leads to headaches, stomach aches, and sleep disturbances. So, and the amygdala is in that part of the brain. That's the one that is the emotional dysregulation, anxiety. It's the alarm system. So you can read more about that. And again, there's more. This is kind of more detail I wanted to at least add in there for you, kind of support. But there are actual physical structures and neurobiological processes in the brain that are behind these things. The seeking connection, they actually tie that to the reward system. One thing you may see in a kid's case is you may see that longing for, especially with a parent, you may see them seeking their parent, even though the parent's gone, and just know they're not losing their mind. There's a thing going on in their brain about attachment and yearning. I know, like, sometimes if kids lose a parent when they're in their teens, you know, like they'll start seeing signs everywhere that dad's here. You know, there's a dad keeps leaving the same clue for me everywhere I go. And, you know, all throughout their whole life. And who knows, maybe dad really is. I don't want to poo-poo that. But there's also a piece in the brain that's wiring us to want to do that. We talked about risk taking. Again, that's because we're, you know, we want to have immediate gratification and we're not reasoning. I think we kind of talked about that, so I'm going to move on a little bit. So the therapy models that work well with an adolescent would be dialectical behavior therapy, which is basically helping you with regulating the emotional parts of your brain, which is the midbrain and the lower brainstem, and then tying in so you can regulate and then you can start reasoning. And it's a similar is mindfulness cognitive behavioral therapy, sort of the same thing, but more specific. You're using mindfulness to regulate, and then you're using cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of help correct thoughts that are maybe not helpful. Like, it's my fault dad died. Well, actually dad died because dad was struggling and it had nothing to do with you, and but you have to work on all that, and you have to first do the emotional regulation. Those are some of the other therapy approaches that work. Nature therapy is great for teens. Walking, driving is actually great therapy for them too, if you drive and they talk. And then narrative therapy, storytelling. Geek therapy is great. Kids love anime. Talk about what would your superpower be to cope with losing your dad. If they're drawing anime characters, what special powers would you have for that? What special powers did your dad have that you don't have anymore, and what can you use instead? Or just kind of meeting them in their language. Go on a quest with them or a side quest. And then peer support is huge for teens. So I'm a big fan if you can find a support group or other group with common loss, that is really helpful for them. Interventions would be, again, creating a safe space, and that's where the kid's not going to get lectured on how they're reacting. They're going to be able to say what they say, and anything you say is okay. What you do might not be okay, punching a window, but I would feel so mad I want to punch a window. That's okay to feel that way. Might not be okay to go punch that window right now, but physical outlets are really important. So exercising can be helpful. Art therapy is awesome with kids. Music is key for them at that age. You can do a lot of fun things with music, and what would your soundtrack for your dad be? What would your soundtrack be for your recovery, or when things are feeling better, what songs will be on that, or that sort of thing. Psychoeducation is a big one with adolescents, because they benefit from learning that, oh, what I'm going through is normal, I'm not crazy, just like all of us do. When you learn, oh, that's normal, most people going through this experience grief brain, I'm not becoming schizophrenic or whatever I'm worried that's going on with me, I'm not psychotic. So routine and consistency is just as important at that stage as it is for littles. But the kids they'll resist because they don't need anything. So that can be one good way to be more strict, is in that time of recovery with grief, is making sure they have more of a steady routine if you possibly can. And then when to seek professional help might be when you've got more severe depression, not doing activities that they've enjoyed, not connecting in with friends, isolating, self-harm or suicidal ideation. So we talked a bit, there's overlap between grief and trauma. They look a lot the same. They affect parts of the brain, and where you're at developmentally when it happens impacts how you experience it and what's helpful for you. But the difference is grief is attachment and longing. Trauma is an experience that causes threat and fear. So they are different, and sometimes they overlap, like in the experience of where you lose someone, a violent death that is traumatic and a loss. So I just like to pull this slide in one more time to remind you of all the different levels, think about them, and that you want to go up from the bottom up. And this is true for any of us, actually. You want to start if I'm dysregulated, you want to meet me there. If that's the part of my brain that's really going, if I'm anxious, meet me there first. Don't try to reason with me. This is another one. I threw a couple more slides in just so you'll have them, because I think they're cool. This is another one that's kind of that neurosequential model of development, and it talks about which parts of the brain have which kinds of interventions and therapy might be helpful. And so some of the trauma type oriented interventions are also really helpful in grief, that sort of thing. And this shows you that top down, at least in the model that I've talked about, is not your first line. It's your last line. You're going to start bottom up. So you want to help them cope with their raw emotions first. And then this is another one I love. I'll just let you look at that. But this talks about the idea of the 3 R's of the neurosequential model is regulate, then relate, then reason. And I think this will be helpful for any of us who work with young people in any setting, certainly at school, certainly in our homes. You got to help them regulate before you can relate and then you got to relate before they'll even start reasoning. So a lot of times we come in and do the lecture. And that lecture is going to just not even be processed if they're down here dysregulated. So when the kid's running away, you don't like try to reason, stop, you can't leave school right now. It's going to be, we got to address this kid's in fight or flight. How do we meet them there and help them down? Then eventually we'll talk about if you keep leaving school once they're calm. So I like that though. Regulate, then relate, then reason. So again, kind of for your assessment, if you are looking at them, you want to look at what their regulation is and what point they're in developmentally, if there was a disruption in their attachment. You want to also look at where they're at age-wise, and very important is you want to evaluate the caregiver availability. That's a huge, huge, huge piece of what's the plan here for this kid. So your clinical priority is to stabilize regulation before processing it. And how you do that is helping them expand their window of tolerance, doing things that help. So predictability, healthy habits, some of the interventions we talked about. The goals are to restore regulation and then to support expression of the feelings. And if there's guilt, reduce their guilt. And there often is guilt developmentally. That's kind of how our brains, we're the center of the universe when we start out, and we become a little less so, especially when we have children, then we're not even in the same universe as them. But strengthening, continuing bonds, and supporting caregivers is key. You'll know they're making progress because they have improved tolerance of feelings, reduced physical symptoms, less pain, less stomach ache, and you'll see that they're more flexible in their grief expression. You can discharge them when that happens, or you can say, I think you can end therapy, or you can say, I don't think you need therapy. You're doing great with our plan to just support you as your support system, but just remember grief reemerges with every developmental stage. And so normalize that is going to happen. Normalize going back to therapy, or normalize that you're going to be doing great and then you're going to feel like you're not doing great again. That's normal. And so planning for anniversaries is important for kids. So, planning birthdays, holidays, whatever that is. The other thing is to plan for those unmet anniversaries. So dad may not be there at graduation. Graduation may be in 6 years, but you can bet that's going to come up in 6 years for that kiddo. My dad is not here. It might not be all day crying about it anymore, but it's going to be big. So those kind of anniversaries are important too. So your key takeaways are grief lives in the nervous system first. It's a brain thing. Development determines how we express our grief. You have to regulate before you can learn or help someone learn. And that relationship is key in healing. So I'm going to quickly go through play therapy stuff. This is my commercial for play therapy. A lot of times parents will say, it's great that you guys are having so much fun, but I'd really like you to work on some skills or work on something. I don't want you to just play the whole time. And just to remember that play is their work. And these are all the things they're learning through play. And we're not going to learn them through lecturing. So again, movement, teamwork, conflict resolution, communication, self-regulation, all that. That's a play therapy. Just a typical play therapy studio has very curated toys, specific things to address those different needs. So you've got things to help nurture, you've got things for imagination, you've got things for storytelling, art expression, you've got things for punching bag for anger. A lot of key things are present in that room, which is why a play therapist can be specifically helpful. So there you go. I'm just more of the commercial. This is just what we talked about, but why it helps. Self-expression. So experiencing processing, we've done that. Behavior rehearsal is a big part for kids, so they can start rehearsing surviving in their imaginary play. So these are some books I really recommend you. I just put the covers in so you'd have all the info you'd need to find them. The Invisible String we talked about. Benson the Boxer is a grief thing. It's a dog's loss of his best friend, but it follows neurobiology really well and helps kids without talking about neurobiology to understand what's going on. Some other really cool things. Anything that Alan Wolfelt has the practical ideas for healing, like for a teen's heart or a child's heart, one little page at a time in that is just, she's just got so many gems. Do this, try this, think about doing this. It's awesome. For older kids or young adults, Your Head is a Houseboat, which is neurobiology, but in a kind of a comical way, and focused on what's going on in your head, especially as you're getting older, going from teen to adult. Handful of Quiet is my favorite meditation thing for kids, teaching them how to meditate. So this is where I got the info from. These are key people in the world of neurobehavior, neuroanatomy, neurobiology, and play therapy and therapy and child development. And they all mostly have good podcasts too, or YouTube channels. So that's all I got. So that's it. We only have a tiny amount of time for a question. Anyone have a burning question? You do, yes.
Very beginning, I've been thinking that we're gonna need more of this. What's more of what's going on right now with all the threats to kids with deportation to their families?
Yeah.
Teachers and just people in their neighborhood.
Yeah. So the comment was, we're going to need more of this with everything that's going on around in the world. And yeah, so I agree. It's can be a really stressful world, and a lot of us are back down to that. Am I safe? And then, am I loved? And so part of how we help is creating community, so that middle part of our brain is like, I am loved. It's okay. Now I can start thinking clearly again, and we can solve these problems. All right. Any other questions online or anything? Nope. All right. Thank you.
Give it up. Okay. Give it up for Candace one more time, everyone. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in today. As we mentioned, it is recorded, so check it out on the YouTube page, and be on the lookout for the evaluation that'll be sent to that from the interim education email account. And just one more time, I want to plug our presenter for next month. It's going to be on Parkinson's research, supporting Parkinson's medication management and practice, led by Hazel Hayworth. So that'll be all Zoom, is that correct?
That's also
Zoom only.
plus from Belfast.
Yeah. Belfast.
Also, I will send out the link to the presentation so people have the link and then download the PowerPoint.
I'll be sending out a link to the presentation so you can download the PowerPoint, so just be on the lookout for that as well. So again, thanks everyone for coming out
Thank you.
today, and have a great afternoon.